On this episode of the Fieldhouse Files, I'm bringing in a national perspective. I'm joined by Jake Fischer, a senior NBA reporter for Yahoo Sports. And welcome into the Fieldhouse Files, the podcast where I take you behind the scenes with the Pacers, talk to individuals on and around the team, and tell you what you need to know. Well, by this time, the Pacers are now a couple weeks into the season. They're 3-5, and they're even ahead of four other teams in the Eastern Conference. I'd say it's gone kind of as expected. A couple highlight games, them hitting 23 three-pointers in a win the first time in Brooklyn over the weekend, but then losing the next game. And they now have a favorable schedule as well. I think it's interesting this year how the NBA has done the schedule. I found, certainly with the Pacers, but also across the league, is there's a lot more games and groupings. For example, the Pacers had that weekend series in Brooklyn, but more specifically, like 4 home games like the Pacers are about to have, then a couple road games, 4 more home games, and they go out west for a 7-game road trip. I've been on this beat over a decade, and that's easily the longest road trip that this Pacers team has had. Normally, being in the Midwest, it's a couple 5-game road trips out west a year, and otherwise it's 2- and 3-game road trips, but usually never more than that. But they're just coming off of a 5-game road trip, and after Thanksgiving, we'll head out for 7 straight games, which is a challenge, especially those with family. I was talking to Chris Duarte about this, and he agreed easily the toughest part was being away from his family, especially his young son, Chris Jr., who's like 2 and kind of models and mimics and does anything and everything his dad does and just wants to hang out with him and eat dinner with him and go to bed with him and swim with him and play basketball. That would be a tough part. I can't relate with that, but I definitely recognize it and can understand that. But right now the team is relatively healthy. That's a good sign. Let's knock on wood somewhere. Let's hopefully see that continue so that we can see what this team can become. We're starting to learn more about this group. I'd say so far, Haliburton and Mathurin have exceeded expectations, certainly have at least matched them, those two producing consistently. Then I think elsewhere, it's just kind of been different guys every single night. Jalen Smith goes off for 17 in a game. Miles Turner has a terrific game in Washington, 27, 10, and 5. Isaiah Jackson, first game in Brooklyn, he finished with like 18 points, 10 rebounds, really solid double-double off the bench. Andrew Nembhard goes from not playing in the first game to playing 30 minutes in the second game and now being used sparingly. But I think for the most part, when he's been in there, he's been a positive contributor. I like the fact that they have 3 pass-first point guards out there. And then Chris Duarte, admittedly a little bit of a slow start, not how he would have liked for the start to his season to go, but then he broke out of that a little bit. Not even a slump, but kind of found a rhythm and hit some shots Monday in a loss at Brooklyn, scoring 30, the best game of his NBA career. Then I also did want to single out Buddy Hield. He has been a consistent producer, shooting like 43% from the arc, scoring 20-plus points over the last week and just being really steady, hitting an average of 5 threes per game. That's exactly what he needs to do, and that's what he so far has done this season. His first full season with the Pacers has a couple more years under contract. We still haven't seen Daniel Tice, and guard Aaron Nesmith is back dealing with a foot injury, this time to his other foot, his right one. He's going to miss some time, but hopefully not more than a couple of weeks. It has now been 1 week after it happened a week ago in Washington, D.C. Now, as for this episode, I think you'll really enjoy it because it's a different perspective. It's a national perspective with Jake Fischer, who started, like many do, on a local beat. And we really didn't know each other until this summer. We had DM'd for a year. And by the way, that's one of the big benefits of Twitter, of social media. Right now, there's so much negativity out there about it. At least my experience, the good far outweighs the bad. So I'm appreciative. And then at Summer League, and actually before Summer League in Vegas, we were together in Chicago for the draft lottery and the draft combine. We were one of, I want to say it was 8 of us, locked away in the draft lottery room where they actually held the drawing. So that's where we really got to know each other well there is, you're in there for 2 hours and you know the result and you don't have your phone. But, he covered the 76ers, now with Yahoo Sports as a national writer. And on top of that, with the Pacers being in Brooklyn, you had Miles Turner on a podcast. And also in his latest piece, Jake talked with Tyrese Haliburton over the weekend in Brooklyn and then wrote about him being given the keys to the Pacers, being the face of the franchise. Before we get to that conversation, just a reminder to subscribe to fieldhousefiles.com to read and support my work. Some stories are free, including my latest on Chris Duarte. Team also had hundreds of members of the armed forces, military members at practice, treated them to breakfast, signed autographs. Really cool. I touched on that as well in that story. That one's free, but most of my stuff you will have to pay for, just $5 a month. Cost of a latte. Not very much anymore, especially. But that's where you'll get daily coverage. So I encourage you, at minimum, subscribe as a free subscriber to get basic coverage, but I think you'll see in due time you'll want to elevate that and join the rest of the community, hundreds who are paying each month to be a paid subscriber at Fieldhouse Files. All right, as promised, I'm now joined by Jake Fischer, senior NBA reporter for now Yahoo Sports. So, Jake, first of all, congratulations on the new gig, and secondly, it was great to finally meet you in person and have some good conversations this summer at Summer League.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the congrats. People need to stop congratulating me now. I feel like there's a lot of pressure now on making all the congrats worthwhile. So
Here's what
just
I'll
let me sneak in the back door of this new title.
But this is what I'll say, like, especially in media and sports media, it is so damn difficult. There's so much competition. Like, I think we all need to celebrate each other's little victories for that exact
I
reason.
appreciate that, man. I
So,
appreciate that.
That's at least
Yeah.
how I look at it.
No, it has definitely felt like that. I appreciate all the support from people in the business and outside of it, and I am hoping nothing but similar opportunities for other people, and I'm always happy to help others and give feedback on how to figure out some type of path in this
Right?
wild world that we live in. So yeah, man, no, it's all good things. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And yeah, we're all just trying to figure it out and try to navigate it and carve out our own little niche and whatever. And for me, that's been the Pacers for the last, 10 years or so. And I had the pleasure of joining you on your call-in podcast over the summer with Talking Pacers for once, which is interesting because they do not get talked about much on the national conversation. And if they do, as we'll get into, it usually involves one of the power teams in the league. But I think just to start, because you are covering the league as a whole, I'm just curious what you make of kind of this first month of the season, just because there's very little basketball talk. It's Lakers troubles, Robert Sarver, Celtics, Udoka, Nets, who the Pacers just played a couple games in a row, Draymond, Josh Primo.
Yeah.
Everything has been dominated by things away from the court.
Yeah, it hasn't been a banner start to the season for the league, especially when you think about this time last year. There was kind of a pall cast over Media Day when Media Day turned into kind of a mission to seek out whether or not players were vaccinated, you know? And I think the drama off the court in the league in terms of transactional stuff, in terms of the relationship fodder being that this is a business largely based off of who you know, in terms of front office people and coaches getting jobs, players wanting to play with certain players, and it's a small world. And when just like the fact that Adam McKay and Will Ferrell, I believe, are like no longer friends after some thing, you know, some oversight, some overlook in a casting thing in the movie industry. Like that type of stuff, the stuff that ends up on page 6 in the New York Post, like that's all fun and good. But when it gets into the area that we've gotten to of late, where there's stuff about sexual impropriety and anti-Semitism and dismissing other people of other cultures and backgrounds, it's not great, man. Especially when you think about how the league likes to uphold itself as this moral high ground in the professional sports entertainment industry. It's tough. It hasn't been an awesome week.
It's fair to say what probably 90% of your phone calls, your texts are central part of over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah. I mean, my job is unfortunately to kind of drop everything at a point in time when a story is demanding to be covered and to have the truth be told. And look, the Spurs situation, the woman, forgive me for not knowing her name. I think the lawsuit just came out, or she firmly identified herself and everything, but I'm still collecting stuff there. But like, she's alleging San Antonio knew about the Primo stuff since January 22. So it's 9 months now, or we're November. So it's 10 months now, depending on when that actually
Right.
happened. And press releases, the whole Steve Nash mutually parts ways from Brooklyn. Like, yes, from my reporting, was he burnt out and ready to leave? For sure, but he didn't want to get fired. Like the that job, that parting of ways becomes mutual when the employer says we want to get rid of it. It's, oh, okay, yeah, I think you're right. You know what I'm saying? So I think like the job is to work on behalf of the fans and readers to find out stuff that aren't necessarily supposed to be getting out there to educate them and reveal the full picture. So yeah, a lot of the phone calls have been trying to do that, and they're not easy. They're not fun. It's way more fun to talk about trade scenarios and who's going to get Donovan Mitchell and stuff like that.
And I'll even take it a step further. I love when talking about what, say, Donovan Mitchell has done now and what the Cavs could be and what the Celtics, how they are adapting with their new head coach. Truly the basketball talk, which is very hard for us all, I think, to get into, especially you guys on the national level, just considering so many different topics that you guys need to have a stranglehold over and try to cover for all of us and hold teams accountable, I think, more than anything. One thing that's cool, whereas I'm on the Pacers side, you got started with the 76ers, and that was, 5-6 years ago on that 76ers beat, kind of overlapping with the process. And while the Pacers certainly aren't going to that level, and I'd probably argue that that's generally not a successful route, you overlapped during that process. So I'm curious kind of what were some of your takeaways throughout all of that, and what stuff during that time did you try to focus on covering as maybe the losses pile up? And I should mention, by the way, to the audience, you wrote a book all about this, Built to Lose, how the NBA's tanking era changed the league forever. I can tell you, I bought a copy like a year and a half ago, but I also will admit it's kind of on the shelf right now with about 10 others I've yet to get to, but I promise you I will eventually.
It's all good, man. I appreciate the purchase. Yeah, I got my start as an intern at Slam Magazine the summer of 2013 and covering that draft largely because I was a Sixers fan and growing up, and this team that I had cared about at the time, they weren't reporting their draft workouts anymore. That was a very early theme of Sam Hinkie's tenure, in that he wanted to have a veil of secrecy over what their front office and basketball operations were doing. So I was getting on the phone with agents trying to figure out which players were in those workouts, and that kind of signaled to other teams at a certain point that I was going to be able to tell them who was going to be in the Sixers workouts, which was not like a super, super important aspect of that draft because Philly had the 11th pick, but teams picking 12th and 13th and 14th and down the list were curious, Everything come draft time is a data point. And moving forward after that internship, I was at Liberty Ballers covering the Sixers for SB Nation for a couple of years, all throughout Hinkie's tenure. And it was the number one talk, to your point about, storylines commanding so much oxygen. I mean, the Sixers process years was the number one storyline in the NBA for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at SB Nation, we had access to the data, the traffic data of all 30 team blogs. I know there's more with the draft, and there's still a Seattle one. There was a WNBA blog at the time, and I know their coverage has grown a lot more in the W. But the Liberty Ballers was pretty routinely at the top of the list in terms of traffic, and that wasn't just because we had a lot of good writers, but it's because the storyline was what it was, and it was so bold and brazen the way they were going about doing it, of stacking such a roster that was doomed to fail. That's largely why the book is called Built to Lose, because the rosters were built to lose. The coaches and the players were certainly trying to win. All the veterans, like Miles Turner, were trying to play their way into getting traded to another team. So it really is an organizational strategy from up top, and I think from your standpoint, like you said, you don't know if it works. I think the whole book I wanted to look at, because it is not easy to do. It is not easy to crash a plane and then rebuild the plane and get the plane back up in the air. It's very easy to crash the plane. Mm-hmm. Anyone can do it. Anyone can sit behind that wheel and just turn yourself into the woods and create a new episode of Lost. But it's really, really hard to get back, and the trials and tribulations that along that path. There's so much luck involved. There's all these interpersonal things that could come up, and there's a lot of money involved. Especially, I mean, the Pacers are going to see this inevitably if they start to be good. Even if they don't start to be good, eventually Tyrese Haliburton and Chris Duarte and Bennedict Mathurin and whoever they pick this year and Isaiah Jackson, all these guys have to get paid at a certain point too, and it's a lot easier said than done to get to identify these guys, put them together, make them fit, have them enjoy each other's company and working alongside one another and build a sustainable culture where you can win year after year after year and also still keep everybody happy monetarily. I mean, we're seeing in Phoenix right now with Deandre Ayton, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and Cam Johnson not getting his extension this year go around. It's not an easy path.
Yeah, and with those players, one of the things I think about too is you're drafting not only talent but characteristics towards your end goal, right? And so with the Pacers, for example, they're really locked into guys that love the game. They're not just talented at the game. The guys that are uber competitive, which we see with Bennedict Mathurin, like at the end of a game, they're down 17 in Chicago, and he steals the ball from his college teammate with like 7 seconds to go score. Vucevic gets mad. He goes, hey, look, the game's not... Like, those are characteristics to the point of, at some point it all comes to a head here of, a team wants to have a higher draft pick. They also want to develop players with certain characteristics. So, yeah, there's so many challenges that go into it. On top of that, maybe it's a coaching staff or a coach trying to prove or keep their longevity, I think, in the league. So I find that really interesting. And I'm curious, going into this season, then, based on what we know and what the Pacers have made public and all that type of thing, what type of tasks do you expect to kind of have in front of them here for the next at least year and a half as they try to get through it? And then you start looking forward, thinking, like you said, even to contracts, to playing time. Do guys get unhappy with their roles, etc.?
I mean, the biggest thing at the end of the day, from my perspective, is you need to strike gold in terms of having the right player fall to you the right year at the right spot. Going to 2007, if Greg Oden's not in that draft class, the Portland Trailblazers have taken Kevin Durant. This year's draft, we got a pretty clear, obvious 1 and 2 right now, according to everyone in the draft community. That's Victor Wembanyama 1 and Scoot Henderson 2, and the Thompson twins. Now, it seems like anecdotally people are saying one of the Thompson twins, I forget which one, forgive me, is a little bit better. So what if it's a 3-person draft? And what if the Pacers finish with the 4th pick in the lottery? What if they get the number 1 pick and get Victor Wembanyama, and all of a sudden you're pairing Tyrese Haliburton and a 7'3" combination of Giannis Antetokounmpo, Dirk Nowitzki, and Rudy Gobert? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was part of why Sam Hinkie did this so brazenly and why the Thunder are doing it so brazenly, in that they recognize the number of chances that you need in order to strike gold once. I mean, you and I were in the lottery room this May in Chicago.
That's right,
where Sam Presti got the number 2 pick, which they were ultimately able to use to take Chet Holmgren. But the way the lottery works, it's not like it happens on TV. They draw for 1, they draw for 2, they draw for 3, they draw for 4, and then everyone else falls in line. And after he got that 2nd pick, I remember being struck by the fact that Presti was staring forward. He was locked in. They still had another chance of getting a pick. I think it ended up being 12th after the lottery concluded, which they had to move up to get Dieng with the Knicks at 11, but that's a whole other side tangent. But that 12th pick for a second had a chance of being 3 or being 4. And you need those chances to try to get up there to take a swing, because you might get Tyrese Haliburton and Bennedict Mathurin and Chris Duarte, who all turned out good, but then you could also be like Philadelphia and several other teams where, in between the Joel Embiid and the Ben Simmons, who was a multi-time All-Star in Philly that was able to get them, James Harden, like there are the Nerlens Noels and the Jahlil Okafors and the Michael Carter Williams and so on and so forth. So that is the thought as to why you take more chances, because if you just do it once, and especially in a draft like this where the riches are so obvious but you miss out, it can be a deterrent or something that doesn't exactly springboard you forward like you were hoping for, and you have to figure out other ways to get back to the top.
And to that point, those inside the Pacers organization, that Pacers family, know about that from the WNBA side. Since Tamika Catchings retired, they'd have the worst record in professional sports. Still have not had the top overall draft pick. They've selected like third, fourth, second, third. They're waiting for that coveted spot because so many times it might be that one game changer, franchise-changing talent. And so, Pacer fans, that's why you're seeing, at least going into this upcoming draft, if things fall ways they should, Pacers will have 3 swings at it potentially, or you package them up. But you got Cleveland's pick, you got Boston's pick for the chance to swing at it. And to your point too of Victor and Scoot and those two, Pacers had, I don't know if this was the norm for teams. I know the Pacers had about a dozen executives and scouts combined out in Las Vegas for those couple of games. Like, they've been all in. They've been tracking this draft class, the next couple, for several years here. Before I move on from that process, I'm curious, because TJ McConnell was there, do you have any great stories or something notable that stands out to you in your interactions with him? Because, number one, there's not a guy in the league I've met that doesn't like him, whether it's a coach, a player, an official. And also, he has that unique trait to just be so likable, so funny, and connect with everyone.
Yeah, no, I really like TJ. I saw him here Monday night when that Nets game you were referring to earlier. Went to the locker room. I've grown my hair out since the pandemic started. It's my first time finally getting back in locker rooms. And I've known TJ over the years, especially through working on the book. And he was like, "Man, you got to cut your fucking hair."
That sounds exactly like him. Yep.
I remember Nick Stauskas, who became very, very close with TJ in their Philly time, telling me that in that first training camp, which I believe was 2015, the 15-16 year, that TJ going undrafted, not exactly the most athletic player in the NBA ecosystem, was really unsure of his spot on the team, to the point where he kept asking Nick Stauskas after every practice, like, "Do you think I'm going to make the team? Do you think I'm going to make the team? What do you think? Do you think I'm in a more solid spot today compared to yesterday?" Like, he really is a guy who, maybe it's waned off a bit now because he's become a true veteran. Has made quite a bit of money. I'm happy for him. But for at least the first couple of years of his career, before Indy came and paid him, he really conducted himself like he was on the edge of being out, and really didn't take a day for granted and worked his ass off. So, yeah, big fan of TJ McConnell.
Yeah, he's great. I think he felt that way probably until that last contract that he's currently on with the Pacers. Got a 4-year deal, and because when he signed originally with the Pacers, he said he had very few options. And to that point, I think the last year was non-guaranteed or a partial guarantee. Sixers didn't really make an offer, go after him, which is, I believe, is proven to be a mistake there. But now he's making good money, and he's contributing in so many ways. We see on the court, but I can tell you, even after practice today, countless guys mention the fact of how he challenged them, how he leads them, how he's the ultimate teammate. You wrote on Yahoo Sports here this week after Tyrese Pacers were in Brooklyn about Tyrese Haliburton and how we're seeing him not just be the face of the team, but the team is being all in on him. I mean, whether you're talking about free agents discussions, whether you're talking about what it takes to start the season or team meetings, he is involved very much so in all those conversations. Maybe what did you learn and what did you gather through your reporting?
I learned the Pacers didn't necessarily want people to know that he was involved in that meeting.
Oh, they didn't? That's interesting. And you're obviously referring to Deandre Ayton meeting, but I mean, yeah, as it was told to me too, once he figured out they could be in on Ayton, then he told them, "Hey, let's go get him, and then I'll do whatever."
Yeah, no, I think, look, we were just talking about Victor Wembanyama. When I went to Vegas for the Wembanyama week against G League Ignite, and excuse me if that car horn outside is being picked up.
Is that New York?
I'm moving away from the window.
Okay, you're good.
Excuse me. The thing I was most concerned, or not concerned, the thing I was most taken by with Wembanyama was not just him being as advertised on the court, but I was blown away by the person and the mind and the thoughtfulness that he brings to his craft. And I think Giannis has shown that in spades. Tyrese has, between the years at least, and I believe in his heart, he's the type of guy you want to build a team around. And his game backs it up. He's a connector. He's a pass-first player. He definitely seems to relish when his teammates are doing well, especially when he's playing a factor in their success. If he can continue to show the signs that he's shown already and develop as he has developed as a player, he is absolutely going to be a top tier player on a championship caliber team. I really do believe that. I know the Pacers believe that. Um, from my conversations around the organization, it sounds like they also recognize that he's going to need a lot of help, and they're trying to add to this roster in ways that are complementary to him, and have him a part of it from day one, so that this guy who's got this smile and this energy around him is a main fabric of the culture, and maybe there can be some extensions of him throughout the rest of this franchise moving forward.
And one of the biggest challenges I would foresee in all this is keeping his happiness, having a successful team. Like, he's one of those guys, for example, hates to lose, is always on the court, those sort of things. So you can't allow this to compound to a 3-year process, with it moving forward. He's just 22, but you're right. One of the most impressive things I think about him is him understanding his role off the court, how he's kind of the team spokesman, how he's willing to stick up for teammates, all those different characteristics for a guy so young who hasn't even experienced the playoffs, none of that just yet. The big conversation piece nationally, of course, is what are the Lakers? What are Russell Westbrook and all of them doing? And that directly relates to this Pacers team because, of course, the obvious potential trade of Miles Turner and Buddy Hield. I've never really understood it. That's why I actually haven't written about it. It's probably bad for analytics and stuff because it would probably do well, but I've just never understood it ever since I think going back from exit interviews when it was first mentioned here. Tell me if I'm off, Jake, here, but for one, I feel like you could go out and probably get a first-round pick separately, perhaps, for both of those eventually. Also, if you're a small market, why would you really want to look to help the Lakers? And third, remember, the Lakers were fined for tampering with Paul George so many years ago. I don't know. Unless something was added to the mix, I'm not sure I would do that.
Yeah, I mean, Miles Turner's market value to me is very similar to Jeremy Grant a year ago, in that his was similar to Aaron Gordon's before him, where he was on an expiring deal, or a deal that's going to expire sometime soon, and he's probably not an all-star, but very, very, very close, and really could be a missing piece type player on a team. If it was someone like Charlotte, who's been lacking a center pretty much, forever,
Yep.
especially in this LaMelo Ball tenure, and they're definitely a team that's checked in on Miles and has had opportunities to go get him and haven't. The Patriots want 2 first-round picks for him, so to take roughly that value and Russell Westbrook's expiring contract and give up Buddy Hield seems like something that is below what the Pacers will ultimately want. But at the same time, like, just because that's what their market value should be, like, the Nets didn't get an offer that made them want to part with Kevin Durant this summer. If they did, if there was really something that knocked their socks off, if they got Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam and something else from Toronto and picks, they probably would have done it. So at the end of the day, that might end up being what the Pacers' biggest offer is, especially with Miles so far signaling that he wants to test free agency. So if you're trading for him and don't necessarily have assurances he's going to be sticking around, that could be damaging to his trade market. And coming out and talking on a podcast about your pretty obvious interest in going to the Lakers, that would, I think, further dull a team's spirit that he wouldn't just want and have an eye of going to that team in free agency if they're open to taking him on. So I don't know what the market will be come February, but we kind of have a linchpin a little bit as to where things can pivot and shift, being that in theory that deal is somewhat on the table and has been discussed in some capacity. So that's going to be the obvious benchmark to start any conversation about trading for either of those two guys.
Yeah, that podcast was just very weird, bizarre. So many touch points and talking points, but I thought it was bizarre kind of to start off with that awkwardness. Maybe it was just trying to break some tension or whatever, but by no accident. I mean, that obviously took place when the team's in New York, And Miles for years has been seeking more national attention for himself, for the team, and for him specifically as it relates to league awards. That's why he doesn't believe he's being considered for Defensive Player of the Year, first, second team, all defense, etc. Just because people, frankly, don't watch him. To use the great quote from Roy Hibbert to Tom Haberstroh several years ago. I guess that'd probably be a decade ago now that I think about it. But nonetheless, I'm not expecting anything to happen really on that front or anything too much significantly here for like another month, right? Because in general, that stuff doesn't happen around the holidays till New Year's or so when we're 25 games in. Teams figure out what their teams have. I mean, Brooklyn's now clearly the obvious exception, firing a coach, but I don't think anything the Nets are doing right now is the norm.
No, yeah, it's typically December 15th when a lot of these free agent contracts become tradable, is a big trigger date for these conversations to get spoken about again. And deadlines help, pressure helps create diamonds, right? So, or maybe pressure makes diamonds is the expression. Maybe you need pressure to make diamonds, not just help it, right? So a lot of these talks will definitely come around there and come around that 20-25 game sample size, like you mentioned, where, teams spent all offseason working on these things and thinking, by no means do most teams think their roster is complete on opening night, but you don't think you got a ton of work ahead. So there's sample size things here. All these teams have started 3-4, 4-3, 3-5. Like, if that stretch happened in January, the sky wouldn't be falling. So you're hoping to see a normalized sample of data and figure out what you actually have ahead of you before you make any drastic changes. But I do think we're going to see a ton of movement during the season. That's just an educated guess at this point. But there are so many teams who think they should be in the playoffs, who have mandates to make the playoffs, who should be taking a step forward, should be competing for a title, that won't be because 24 teams can't make the playoffs. Even now in the play-in tournament, there's only 20 teams that get into the actual overall postseason. So 4 of those are going to be on the outs, and a lot more than 4 are going to be worried about their path to get there, which I think will stem a lot of activity. And I was just talking to an agent today who was saying, the free agent market isn't exactly loaded with all-star after all-star after all-star. So we could see some teams make some moves in season, especially ahead of the deadline, to get ahead of where they want to be next year, because there isn't such a rich class, and a lot of the top tier free agents seem to be guys who would be pretty quick, like a Chris Middleton, who would be pretty quick to re-sign in the situation he's at. So, yeah, I'm prepared for a lot of movement between now and February 8th or whatever the deadline is.
And I think even on the bottom teams, you'll have a couple teams probably feel that urgency to do something to be relevant, to maybe get into the play-in tournament, and then conversely, you'll have teams go, hey, look, we just don't have it. Promise you 30 minutes. There was one last thing I wanted to get in, and that, of course, was this offseason with the Pacers and doing something they just don't do, and that's led by Herb Simon, the longest tenured owner in the league, and that's going after another team's players. Deandre Ayton was a restricted free agent. How the Suns and their relationship is all very probably an hour-long conversation as is, but I thought it was really interesting how the Pacers went after DeAndre Ayton. They pursued him, met with him at least a couple of times, and got him to ultimately sign a restricted offer sheet. Of course, the Suns matched that right away. But what do you remember from your reporting there, and maybe the league-wide surprise or suspense, I guess, on what went down there, because no one else seemingly made an offer?
No, I think Detroit going and getting Jalen Duren, Duren, I believe is the correct pronunciation, on draft night. It's changed a lot of their salary structure, being that they took on Kemba Walker and Nerlens Noel and Alec Burks, but it also eliminated their wishes of finding a potential young big man to pair with Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham. So that was definitely a landing spot that people around the situation with, who were involved, definitely believe would have happened if the trade for Jalen Duren didn't occur. So that was off the board. I think Toronto definitely had interest, but never actually materialized. And after that, it really did seem like the Pacers were the only real potential landing spot for him, and Phoenix was not going to extend him an offer. They were going to I mean, they clearly were going to match all along, just like they said they would. No one believed them, but they did. So that was probably my biggest takeaway. No one in the league believed that Phoenix was going to just match like that. They didn't think they'd want to pay him. They thought they would kind of hold that over him to get things back in return. And also, I mean, they clearly thought that his restricted free agency and the potential to sign and trade him was going to be enough to get Kevin Durant from Brooklyn. I think when they found out it wasn't, that's when things started to get wonky and the Pacers really emerged.
And behind the scenes, the other interesting point, of course, was the fact that Miles Turner's agent was the same as DeAndre Ayton, and the secondary agent on Ayton is the same as Benedict Mathurin here. And I even was told the Pacers were looking into trying to get Ayton even possibly as late as the trade deadline last year, but for obvious reasons, the Suns wanted to kind of play it out. But that was the first time I had heard Ayton. Hey, keep an eye on him for Indiana. There might be legs to that. Maybe not now, but certainly this summer.
Yeah, no, I remember that too. I remember there was talk about a Sabonis for Ayton thing that never materialized, obviously. But Ayton and Indy absolutely popped up for the first time for me around the deadline last year.
Yeah. And then ultimately Pacers going after it. Didn't work. Pacers did have to eat some money of contracts they waived, but it's Kevin Pritchard telling me, hey, it's a new era. Over the last couple of years, we've had to kind of reset and think about the way we go about things and do things differently. And so far, that has been true. Was still quite surprised that they did that. Jake, anything else you'd like to add to the conversation here? I appreciate you jumping on here and joining this Pacers podcast.
No worries, man. Thanks for having me. Keep it tuned to Yahoo Sports and the NBA page. A lot of good stuff happening from our whole team and my show on Callin. I go twice a week. I'll probably go tomorrow, Friday. Have to figure out the guests, but that's all I got, man. Thanks again.
Appreciate it, and maybe we can get you a trip here to Indianapolis here eventually. So thanks again, man.
I'll figure something out. Take care, man.